as well as in anticipation of the forthcoming sequel, which he wrote and is directing. All this is to say that we are incredibly excited to have with us the incredibly talented and supremely proud Canadian. Please join me in welcoming Jay Baruchel.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Jay, for coming out today.
Hey, thank you. Morning, everyone. Morning.
How'd you guys like the film?
Thank you. Good. You can say if you hated it. It's fine. I didn't direct it.
We were saying it is a pretty intense movie to watch at 11 a.m.
Yeah, it's a hell of a breakfast, eh? You're watching guys beat the piss out of each other. It's not even lunchtime.
It is such an awesome film, and to see it on the big screen, too, is really extra special. And you wrote the screenplay with Evan Goldberg, who's a longtime friend. And hockey, as we all know, I think holds a central place in your life.
It does, yeah.
And so when you pitched with the film, was it like a dream project for you?
Oh, it was the greatest. It was like I had been writing in a vacuum, myself. I was lucky enough to have an acting career, but my raison d'etre, the thing that I thought about the most was wanting to write and direct movies. And so I had written my first script was this really fucking insane horror thing that was 225 pages and just not anything anybody wants to read. But Evan Goldberg, to his credit, was humored me and read it and gave me real good notes on it. And so when they reached out to him and said, we have this book called Goon that we're interested in kind of turning into a Canadian hockey flick, would you be interested? And he said, I would, but I don't know anything about hockey, but my buddy Jay does, and he just wrote a crazy horror film. He thankfully didn't tell them how long the fucking thing was, but and then he and I, it was really easy. It was like 20 minutes. We kind of mapped out. It came to us very quickly, the flick or what we thought it could be, and then I took like a month and a half and banged out the first draft in my bedroom and in a haze of smoke, and then 5 years later, it turned into an awesome movie.
Wow. And it was inspired by the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so what elements were from the original story, and what do you bring to it yourself that you thought was important?
So the book tells the story of a real dude called Doug Smith. And Doug Smith actually is featured in the new one. In Goon, Last of the Enforcers, we have real Doug fight fake Doug. And but he's this guy that kind of fell ass backwards into hockey when he was like 20 or something and was real good at fighting and got a job, had to learn how to skate, and got a job as an enforcer on a team in the Maritimes. And so American kind of tough guy fighting in the Maritimes was the sort of jumping off point to kind of make it our own. The sort of... The first thing that I wanted to do was kind of put my dad in it because my intro into hockey and specifically hockey fighting was all from my dad. And it was a hard thing for me to separate his experiences doing that and playing hockey and liking hockey from being Jewish and an immigrant. And so this was like... my dad was the tough guy on this all-Jewish hockey team in Montreal in the 70s. And the sort of otherness and being in the margins and being a minority and all this sort of like, it just kind of, all this underdog anti-hero stuff for me, I kind of threw it all into this food processor. And so it's inspired by Doug Smith's life, but I think it's the story you just watched is equal parts what we put into it as well.
We definitely see that with Doug, who's he beats the crap out of anyone who comes into contact with his teammates, but he's well-rounded. He's honorable. He was making a good guy, the tough enforcer, part of what you wanted to explore with the
I mean, we kind of thought of him. We had this idea of him as this sort of like almost mythological character, like because he's a bit larger than life. He's sort of has an almost superhuman ability to fight and to endure pain. But we also thought that it was just a real funny guy, this sort of guy who's not necessarily as bright as everyone else around him, and then from that, it led into this sort of weird, innocent kind of. He also talks kind of old timey in a way as well. Like Doug lives almost in his own world, and I remember Michael Dow saying, the director saying on set after we shot the scene when Doug tells me, you have your show, my dad and my brother have their doctor thing, I don't have a thing. I remember we went outside to smoke afterwards, and Douse goes, we can now get him to beat the fuck out of anybody. He's like, the audience is gonna love him, and they're gonna be on board. And it seems like an obvious thing, but it isn't, because like there's just not that many heroes that you give a shit about or find accessible or you care, And so I think it's a testament to Sean and his just inherent natural likability that you kind of just want to be with him and want to see what he does, and you want the best for him. And when you're making a movie, to have the audience feel that of your hero is pretty huge.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And as a hero, the hockey enforcer, is a compelling character. And was it for you and your dad when watching hockey? Is there something about the enforcer and their role and their purpose on the team that really rises above for you?
Yeah, that's definitely it's definitely fodder for debate whether and what place those guys have ever had in the game, blah blah blah. But in my household, we were very much in a, for lack of a better term, pro fighting household, and so my dad's favorite player when I was a kid was Chris Nyland, and we just sort of like. I know, and it was equal parts my mom and my dad, because like my mother would scream far louder than my father if we were out at the Forum and someone dropped the gloves. So it was just like I was raised with started off as just an appreciation, and then kind of a respect for these guys and what they do, and how there's something kind of really beautiful about a guy who's willing to risk everything for what he thinks is right, and to look out for his friends.
Which reads really well. That scene in the diner with Ross and Doug is my favorite, because it is, it's the meeting of equals, the passing of the torch, and is bound up in all those questions about the enforcer and their role.
That's it, and that scene is actually that's almost a first draft scene too. That's like one of the few scenes that changed very little from the first time we wrote it to shooting it, and it was just because like. I think we kind of got it. We saw that there was this great chance to have a bit of a conversation, an almost meta conversation about what these guys do, the universality of what they do. Plus, Heat is one of my favorite movies, and so I rip it off wherever I possibly can.
and Liev Schreiber is incredible, there's I actually when watching it again, I realized there's no real villain in the film, right?
Yeah.
You expect hockey enforcers and that Ross is the eventual guy that Doug needs to take on, but he's respectful
he's the antagonist, not the villain, and that was something that was a battle that I fought the whole time through development, was like the conventional wisdom dictates that we want the audience to hate this guy as much as possible. And I said, no, it's going to, my thinking was, it puts the audience in an infinitely more interesting, uncomfortable position if, like, they'll be rooting for Doug because they've been with Doug the whole movie, but they're not necessarily rooting against Ray. The audience is going to kind of like him, and so you're going to watch two guys that you have an affinity for beat the piss out of each other, and that kind of, to me, is a much more interesting place to put the audience, at least for that first go around, right?
And so, on that point, when you're collaborating with the director, Michael Dowse, and producers and people who are, wanting to guide you in different ways of creating your film, how do you decide which to push back on and really dig your heels in, and maybe some to lighten up on? What's that process like?
I mean, that's the thing. It's a movie's not a novel. It's an inherently collaborative form, and there's a lot of people that have to chime in and should be allowed to, and so. You kind of just pick what your hills to die on are, if I change this, does it negate everything else, right? And so like on the new one, there was shit that my goal was to do everything I had to do, but I also was able to triage it as like, okay, if we do nothing else, at least we need to accomplish this, that, and the other. And so you just kind of have to decide each time how big a deal is this, and is this worth making a big stink over? And sometimes it is, and then sometimes it just isn't.
And when approaching Goon and the new film, being an avid hockey fan, are there things that are important to you that must be in there about hockey and our culture that you want to make sure are part of the story?
I want to make sure that people get from watching hockey in our movies at least kind of close to what they get from watching it on TV or live. So and it's an interesting kind of mission we have with these movies. Is like there's no country on earth where people are more well versed in how hockey is photographed than in Canada. And so how do you scratch those same itches? Like, how do you get people to get what they get from watching it on hockey night or live, but in a new, interesting way? And so kind of what we wanted to do on this one was bring the audience onto the ice with the boys more, more than this one. And so most of our hockey lives either at skate level or at face level with our guys in the new one. We do a lot of broadcast stuff too, but how do you still get on the ice? How do you get how do you get people to get the rush they get from watching a goal scored on TV, but when you're doing it from a vantage they haven't seen yet? And so and the other thing is hockey is one of the fastest games on earth, and so that doesn't necessarily always lend itself to photography, and that's why big pet peeve in a lot of movies is how fucking slow most of the hockey is. And so we if nothing else, this movie, people will think that we played everything at fast forward on this new one.
Yeah, it's not baseball, right?
No, that's exactly right. It's and so your subjects are constantly moving. Your camera is constantly moving, and so there's often specificity kind of has to go out the window a little bit, right? It's you're dealing in kind of vectors, and so when we would send out, we had sort of two rigs that we shot most of our hockey on. One was what we called the shovel cam, which was this camera that's on a plate with 4 pucks on the bottom of it and a snow shovel handle that our grip would just, on wearing skates, would push it. And so we get all this really cool shit of the ice coming past us. It looks like, fucking Road Warrior. But I can't tell them, okay, on this one, because the subject's moving and he's moving, it's got to be averages. So what you're going to favor. So on this one, you're trailing number 44. On this one, lead number 44. On this one, favor the puck. On this one, okay, see that where they go into the corner there? It's all about that moment there. And so that's, and each of those is technically its own sort of shot and setup. And so you get days where we did there was one day where we had 87 setups on one day.
Wow. And, you must be dealing, too, with crew who are encountering some of these new ways of filming and working on the ice, right?
Yeah.
Which is a new kind of...
It is, but, again, when you're here, the vast majority of our crew have grown up on ice. Yeah. And so, this is the thing, is, this is the set we were on, is, our dolly grip Stewie, who shot everything on the movie and did everything with the shovel cam, who played OHL hockey back in the day, he would skate for us all day and then would eat for 7 minutes and go play shinny at lunchtime. And that was most of the crew as well. And so everybody was just kind of happy to have an excuse to be at the rink. Plus it was summertime. So we were all it was the greatest.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. And so you channel, your own hockey love into character of Pat.
Yeah.
And watching this morning, I was thinking that if, some characters lead with different parts of their body, like their heart or their head, that Pat definitely speaks with his mouth, right?
Yeah.
That's where he leads from. And
yeah.
How was it to write a character for yourself that you would eventually play?
Oh, weird. Yeah. I mean, I kind of, I knew that for me it was just all about kind of knowing what Pat meant to Doug in the story, that he's kind of the Merlin character or Burgess Meredith and Rocky, kind of he's just the guy that spurs Doug on to inherit his mantle and his greatness. And but I also knew that it'd be pretty good if he could be kind of a jag-off. And it was also, so I was also exercising demons as a Montrealer. All the Boston kids come up to drink at our city at 18, and so if you grow up in Montreal, you grow up with a bunch of fucking, I'm up in Montreal for the weekend, wicked fucking pissa, all this nonsense, and So Pat is my measured bit of revenge against Massachusetts, I suppose.
With the cable news kind of thrown in.
That's it. Yeah, just white trash, fucking masshole nonsense. Yeah, but I also am not so vain as to realize that like he was quite a polarizing character. There's like he's like 50-50. There's like 50% of people tell me that they love Pat, and then 50% of people tell me that I'm the Jar Jar Binks of Goon, and that I almost ruined the fucking movie. And so that's why he's in the new one in a reduced capacity.
Okay. Well, in the Star Wars comparison, though, you know,
There you go.
it's okay.
Yeah, I suppose, but I don't want to ruin anyone's movie watching experience. So,
Let alone your own. Right?
yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think I'm awesome.
And so reduced capacity in the new film, and likely too because you're now directing, right?
Yeah.
So what was that experience like? Of kind of leading everything this time around?
It was awesome. It was crazy because there's like a lot of moving parts in this story. It's all the characters that are in this movie, and we've added a bunch more big characters as well. And so it's this like. We make little mini epics, right? That's what we tried to do. That's what kind of makes them exciting and sets them apart. And so we set out to make what we called Ben-Hur meets Trailer Park Boys. And so this means that there's over 60 speaking roles, and God knows how many teams that we have to populate and create from scratch, and then how many bits of hockey and we have to create from scratch and all that stuff. And it was insane, but I absolutely adored it. I really, really loved it. It was like it's like franchise mode on a video game where you get to call the shots, but like and then some, right? Yeah.
I know they're having gone through the process, and still going through it. Things that you've learned now about directing and screenwriting too that you didn't know when you first started.
I mean, that's a very, very good question. I guess the thing that I'm constantly learning is that like what I think the story is open to debate. And that's a hard one. It's a hard one to specify because we spent 5 years trying to get a script to a place that we liked it, and we finally did. And then to get that into production requires a bunch of rewrites for budgetary reasons, time reasons, all this different stuff. Then you're rewriting through production as well. And then the edit is the last rewrite. And so so I'm just constantly, and this is not to say that the movie ends up being about something different. It isn't. At its heart, it's the same flick, but I guess the theme ends up revealing itself a bit harder, and there's more ways. It just distills itself in as you're going through it. And so there's a way I describe it where it's like when I'm writing something, at the start I think I know what it's about, and then after draft 1 or 2 I realize what it's actually about. And this is not to say that I'm only now realizing the fucking movie I directed is about. Not at all. But it ends up being about stuff I didn't necessarily realize, and I also start seeing things that the story just ends up revealing itself through every cut, and so all these things that you thought were completely entangled or intrinsic to the rest of it maybe aren't. And so we're in like the baby killing business, as we call it, at the edit suite, because like there's all these scenes that we adore, shots we adore, performances we adore, bits of story we adore, but for the greater good, because the most important thing is that the audience, buys their ticket and feels that they got their money's worth and has the most enjoyment out of it. And if something that, just because I love it and we did it well, that's not reason to keep it in the movie.
For sure. And it sounds like through that whole process, which is a really involved kind of years-long process, that it must be important to lean on collaborators in that.
Big time, yeah. And that's when there's the collaborators that I am directly involved with, and like my cinematographer Paul Sarasi, who shot all of Adam McGoyan's films, and my editor is not really an editor by trade. He's a director. His name is Jason Eisner. He directed Hobo with a Shotgun. He's taken a year off his directing career to cut my movie. And so we got a real A team together, and so there's the people that are involved in the process with me, and then there's also just friends and mentors that I've made, and met over the, I've been acting over 20 years. And so there's like a bunch of people whose brains I can pick that, mean a great deal to me. And so I was like absolutely shameless about milking them for as much advice as they could possibly give me.
And you mentioned your 20 years on set, and last night you talked about cultivating that environment on set for your actors, your crew, your collaborators, and making sure that that meant to you that people weren't miserable and that the time wasn't wasted. And why is that so important to you for that environment to be there?
Because I want them. Because I firmly subscribe to the idea that people are more productive when they're happy. And not everyone does, mind you. And, there are some people that thrive in chaos and like everyone to kind of be operating from a place of fear. And that's just like the exact opposite. That's completely counterintuitive to me. And so I wanted everyone on our set to feel that they knew what was happening. That there was no chicken with a head cut off kind of vibe to it, that we all knew exactly what we were there to do that day. I wanted everyone to be invested, to have skin in the game, and I wanted everyone to feel free to contribute and to make it their own. So I'd have people pitch me shots, and I wanted actors to kind of take ownership of the characters and start pitching ideas for them and all that, just because, like, that speaks to them being involved and giving a shit. And everyone, and that in itself is enough. If it wasn't, from a purely utilitarian standpoint, I get better work in a more efficient day when everyone's happy and likes what they're doing. And I also like, it was, so I've been on set since 1995, and I've had I've been able to work with a bunch of incredible directors and a bunch of people that, left something to be desired. And so I knew, if nothing else, like what not to do. And for me, I found that like the directors that I responded to the best it's a weird combination of confidence and accessibility. So I want to believe that my director, even if it's horseshit, I want to believe that they know what they're doing, and I want to follow them to the gates of hell. But I also want to like them, and so I think that like. Napoleon was a great general because his men saw themselves in him. And I'm not trying to compare myself to Napoleon or any fucking general. All I'm just trying to say is that, like, if you're nice to everyone and they enjoy your company and they get along with you, plus they think you know what you're doing, then everything works the way it should.
That's great. Confidence, accessibility.
I think so. Yeah. Huge.
Cool. And I want to open it up to these folks for their questions. Just one more that we, in Goon we see Halifax, St. John's, Quebec on screen, and a really great bagpipe sequence. Do you feel it's part of your duty as a Canadian to tell our stories on screen, or are those the stories that you want to keep telling?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Canadian and I have stories that I would like to tell. And so for me, it's less about making an effort to tell Canadian stories than it is to make an effort to not censor myself in the hopes that someone else might find it more palatable. Right? Like, and this is not to say that, we should be able to shoot. This country can double for any country on earth, 100%. But there's just an issue I take when it's a Canadian movie. There's Canadian people involved. There's Canadian financing in it. All the talent is Canadian. We all watch it, know it's Canadian, it feels Canadian, and then they open their wallet and there's American money in there for some reason, or there's a New York license plate, and that's all just a chest-moving like appeal that, well, we might get U.S. distribution one day, as if a fucking license plate or the cash in the wallet is gonna be. No, fuck this movie. That's it. I'm not showing this in my theater. Like, it doesn't work like that. So, for me, I'm just about like, if we're going to make movies here, there's no reason to try to hide where they are at. We might as well own it. And that's the other thing is, like, I think we've been told that, we've been conditioned in this country, and it's a very, very, very Canadian virtue, I think, to not think very highly of ourselves. And that's just like that's a beautiful thing to be raised in a country where the worst thing you can be is a fucking show off. It's better to be a failure than a show off, honestly. Right. That's the exact opposite failure, of the States. Yeah, but at least that's real shit, But if you're a show off and you're airing your dirty laundry and fuck that, right? Like, so that's a good thing. But the sort of double-edged sword aspect of that is, I think, a lot of the kind of beautiful nuance and the color and the exoticism of our own country is kind of lost on us. Yeah.
That's a great answer. We have microphones here. If you have a question, throw your hand up and we'll get you a microphone. Go on this side here.
Hi. I'd just like to say I appreciate you coming here and taking your time out of
thanks,
your busy
man.
schedule.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My question for you is, what do you think would be the biggest tip you could give to an upcoming actor?
Yeah, say that again. Sorry, what was the biggest?
What do you think is to you the biggest piece of advice you could give to an upcoming actor?
Yeah. Keep reminding yourself of why you love it, because there's going to be your love and your faith in it and your connection to it are going to be constantly tested, right? Because it's a weird one when what you think of it as selling a product, right? Take art out of the equation. You know, what you're doing is selling your emotional spectrum, right? So even if you're really just doing a gig and you're not emotionally connected to the character in the least, you're still going to be using your laughter and your emotions. And I don't care who you are and how tough you are, when someone doesn't like that, when you put any part of you out there and say, that's not our kind of thing, or that was shitty, that fucking stings like a motherfucker. It really, really does. And so, you know, it's about one of those cliches about having a thick skin and a good chin and being able to take it all, but also it's about endurance, and it's about like, don't let them ever take it from you. Don't let the people, because you go in, you know, auditioning for something and it's an unfair situation because they have something you need and they know that, right? So you can never let them take your love of it from, like, so yeah, you're beholden to them in those environments and in that moment, fine, but that doesn't have anything to do with your love or connection to acting, right? And so I find that the way to constantly remind yourself of that is to be doing shit with your friends for fun in the free time, right? So you go in and you work your ass off for an audition, and you go and you have to go through the degradation of humoring these assholes and all that shit. But then on your free time, you're finding ways to create, and it keeps it pure. And again, from a utilitarian standpoint, then it just keeps that you're always practicing that way. So like it keeps your skill level up, it keeps your game high, but it also kind of reminds you of why you're still doing it, because they will give you plenty of reasons to leave.
Thank you.
Next question down here.
Hi. So, you said that there's not many heroes that we really give a shit about, and I'm just wondering, in terms of the Canadian hero, do you think that sports, for example, hockey, really kind of brings the heroism of Canada, or are there other traits?
Oh no! I mean, there's, you know, I guess when I said that before, I was just trying to say most movies are terribly written, and so you have like heroes you couldn't care less about. But no, I mean, that speaks to a larger cause. Heroes are few and far between. Period. But I definitely think that there's something. The reason why hockey does what it does to us is I think there's something in ancient and tribal in all of us. In wanting your neighborhood to win, and that's millennium old. And I think that when you see these guys who are big and larger than life, bigger than the average human, and they're wearing skates so they even get a bit of height on them, and they're going super fast, and they're wearing bright colored things that are representing your town, you're watching superheroes representing your town. And so it's hard not to get, or your country, and it's hard not to project a whole bunch of stuff on that. So yeah, this is why Sidney Crosby will reduce me to tears, is because he's like, yeah, the superhero waving my flag, and I'm, you know, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. And it's like, you know, and especially in this country where, you know, where patriotism only really comes out of Canada once every 4 years. Let's be perfectly honest. Yeah.
Next question down here.
Oh, okay. First of all, thank you for giving us Man Seeking Woman and She's Out of My League.
Thanks.
And being
Yeah.
Canadian and who you are.
Thanks.
I have a question about where does your inspiration for comedy come from? Like, where do you kind of pull from your own real life scenarios, or do you have idols that you kind of take after, or what?
Well, the implication being that you find me funny, so thank you for that. It's basically, there's like, my heroes for anything kind of funny are Rowan Atkinson, Michael Richards, and Steve Coogan. And so if I've ever been remotely funny to anyone, it's like purely because I've been ripping them off. Yeah.
Is there another question ready? This gentleman here.
Hey, Jay. Name's Morgan.
Hey, man.
I love Goon. First time I saw it, I had the same feeling as I did today.
Oh, awesome. Cool.
I had a really interesting question for you with regards to the writing. Do you find that you listen to a lot of music when you do it? Because there's that one scene when the flame walks in, and he's got Necro pounding. Was that you? I was really curious about that.
That Necro track, I think, is even in the stage direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do that all the time in my own script, and I was just thinking, I'm like, there's no goddamn way. It's got to be him.
Oh,
from the
100%.
screenplay.
But no, like, kind of when I'm starting to think of an idea, the like, you know, because it's first step is always the hardest, right? And so you're just staring at that fucking cursor blinking at you on the screen. You're like, where do I begin? So my way of like convincing myself that I'm working when I'm not really ready to work yet is I make a soundtrack. and that's like the fun work I can start with. But it ends up actually being very, very helpful. And so like I will, you know, build a soundtrack over the course of months. We'll play it through the whole time as I'm writing, and it'll inform a lot of decisions. And then like what's kind of cool is like now seeing this Goon 2 now through the edit is how many songs from that soundtrack from 3 years ago are surviving, are now in the cut and stuff. And no, for me, if I'm not watching movies or reading, I'm listening to music and often doing them all at the same time. And so I can't separate the two. And because this is what makes movies, in my opinion, the greatest art form the world has come up with yet, is it is what Wagner predicted as the total artwork, the Gesamtkunstwerk, as he called it, which was like he was saying that his operas, if he had really interesting theories as to what an audience should experience when they sit down. And this is why he would write stage direction in the Ring cycle, that all the stagehands had to be wearing balaclavas and dressed in black so that nobody could see them. He didn't want any of the audience members to see the orchestra either. He wanted them to see the box on the stage. He wanted to see the lights, the actors, to hear the music and the singing. By the way, that's what a movie eventually became. And so yeah, this is all to say that like because every art form is included in it, yes, I listen to a shitload of music.
Thanks.
And hearing you say that, I mean, the epic quality in Goon is there too.
Big time, yeah. No, we call it like sort of Hoser opera.
Another question. There's one down here in the front, and then in the second row here.
Yeah, from an actor standpoint, going into characters and whatnot, is there times where you feel that you get lost in a character and then afterwards they have brought something back into your actual life apart from the character? Is there things that you bring with you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I for the second thing, I have no choice but to bring stuff with me in every gig, you know, and you know, whether that's like playing a character who's completely different from me or not, I think I would be remiss not to find a way to connect it to me personally and find a way to throw my own shit in there, because that way I'm getting more out of it, and then I think the scene is working better as a result. For the first question, not really, because like my approach to acting, and by the way, I never call myself an actor. That's what other people call me. But my sort of, I try to keep it incredibly simple and bread and butter, right? Like I think that a lot of people will endure a great deal of masochism in an effort to get somewhere, to get to a place. And I don't know that place actually exists. If it does, I don't know how much of a difference you feel as an audience member watching that on screen. And so for me, I always try to do it. I keep it very, very simple. When I'm trying to figure out who the guy that I'm playing is, I start with a bunch of adjectives. I just write a bunch of fucking adjectives, and the more contradictory they are, the better. So if I describe this guy as shy and gregarious, well, that conflict is going to be kind of that little electricity in between those two sort of opposing ideas it's going to shade my character in a big way, or at least I like to think. But when I get there, though, on set, I don't need to be sort of truly believing that I'm going through what I'm going through, right? Like it's like that Marathon Man anecdote, which is probably my favorite film story of all time, which is, Dustin Hoffman and Sir Laurence Olivier shooting the famous dentist scene, and Hoffman had been doing laps around the block and had been up all night and all this shit, and he's all exhausted trying to get to this place, and he asked Olivier, he's like, so I'm like, I've been running around the block for hours, so he's like, what do you do? And Olivier says, it's called acting, my dear boy. And he's just like, there's Olivier, the greatest actor of the 20th century, watching this guy run. He's like, what the fuck are you doing? I was having a cup of tea, and they're going to say action and I'll start acting. and so, like, not comparing myself to anyone in that anecdote. But for me, it's like I always just try to keep it real simple. And so, like, if I have, like, there's a scene in a movie I did called Real Time where I'm on my knees and a guy's got a gun to the back of my head, right? And, I could try and convince myself that that's actually happening, which is like, then I run the risk of fucking puking my guts out in front of everybody, and like, that's just no good. So literally what I did to get there was I would like, I would, I was on my knees, so I'd wait for them to say roll sound. When they started rolling sound, I'd put my hand between my legs so that when I'd come up, all the blood would be coming out, so I'd look pale. I make sure I wasn't blinking so that I got a bit of water going in my eyes. And then I did simple equations. So I'd come up like this with like tears and I'm all fucking white, and I'm just thinking 2 + 2 = 4, 4 + 4 = 8, 6, and as a result, like like no one watches that movie is like, oh, that kid's doing equations. So there's my lazy acting tips.
That doesn't sound lazy to me. Yeah, no. In the second row here, if we can get a microphone over that way. You want to put your hand up a little higher? There we go.
So as someone who's had a lot of experience now with acting, I know you don't prefer to call yourself an actor.
I just don't think I'm that good at it. That's all.
Well, I guess lots of us would to disagree.
Oh,
but
thank you.
yeah. So as someone with experience acting, screenwriting, and directing, is there a specific role that you kind of favor between the three and that you have experience?
Yeah, I adore directing and writing. Now, like, acting has been incredibly good to me, and I respect the hell out of it. And it's like, yeah, I wouldn't have anything in my life without it. And I know how lucky I am to be able to have done it for 20 years straight, when less than 20% of us can feed ourselves from it. But it was never my raison d'etre. All I've ever wanted to do is write and direct action movies and horror movies since I was a little kid. And so when I started acting at 12, even then, Mom said, you want to go to film school, this will be the best film school you can be a part of. And so, yeah, I was always acting as a means of being on set, not on set as a means to act. And so yeah, I much prefer just wearing my own clothes and getting to be away from the lights and bossing everyone around.
I'll just ask one before we head to the front row here. On set, is there things that you did when you were young, or things that you'd recommend? Is it best to listen and observe, or pick the ear of people that are there, or really soak up? What's the best way to soak up that experience on set?
It depends on like what you're there to get from it, And if you're just there to do your thing, then you just do your thing. But if you want to sort of understand the DNA of what a movie is, then there's like, that's how the sausage is made, man. It's good to be there on the floor, and I think that you should just always be listening. Now, whether it's like overt and everyone notices, and like whether you're like, got any news for me, sir? Like, or you're just sitting there absorbing. But I think there's like, there are lessons and stuff to be learned constantly, every day throughout that, to see how every distinct group on set attacks their responsibilities, how they work in concert with each other, what we're all there to do, like my favorite moments are on set are every once in a while you get a moment that unites everybody, right? Because like, and the set just goes quiet, and there's something really beautiful about watching 70 people huddled around a monitor just because the composition of this particular setup was beautiful. And it's just like, and you remind, that's why we're all fucking here, right? So yeah, I think just always listen and absorb, and also never be afraid to ask questions. People, I think you'd be surprised how few people get asked about what they do for a living, and how psyched they would be to talk about it. So like on the new Goon flick, my cinematographer Paul, his daughter Elia was on set, and she's about to go to film school, and she's 17, and she wants to direct movies, and so she had this apprenticeship on our set. Now, she could have just had fun on a summer gig, and that would be that. But she very, very proactively had this little diary that she was writing in all day on set, and she'd ask people, everyone, every sort of actor, background performer, crew members from every different level who would give her the time of day. She'd pick their brain and ask them about what they do and what's important for you and how can you do your job. And when she wasn't asking people stuff, she was just listening and jotting down little bits of info that she heard. And by the end of the movie, she'd filled up the book with anecdotes and interviews and shit. So she goes off to film school with this great little resource. And I just think that, like, versions of that, if you want to learn how to make movies and you get the chance to be on set, then milk it.
Question down here.
Yeah, as the writer of the original film, were you able to have any input into the casting? Because I think the casting is just amazing.
Oh, I agree.
Particularly Sean and Liev, but even supporting roles.
Yeah.
Were you able to contribute to the casting process?
Yeah, they were very kind and respectful in that, and so like I wrote Xavier Laflamme for my buddy Marc Andre, and obviously I didn't have to work to get him in the movie. Like they were very psyched to have him involved. I think I made a lot of pitches. My some less than awesome. My Dolph Lundgren for Ross Ray thing probably. I think it's probably good that didn't happen. But yeah, no, it was great. It was a very, very uncommon amount of input that I had. I think, usually as a writer, as my friend Jacob had said, like, you write a movie and it gets made, all you're owed is a ticket to the premiere pretty much. And so really that's all they had to do. But they, we all worked on it together, which was quite nice.
Question in the center here. There's a microphone on its way here.
Hey, Jay.
Hey there.
What was it like working with the Trailer Park Boys, and did you watch the show and beforehand? Yeah.
No, that's I put Trailer Park up there with Seinfeld and The Simpsons and Joy Division and New Order, like all my favorite shit. And I was working on a movie in New York City, and the sound mixer on set asked me if I'd seen Trailer Park Boys, and I was like, "What, are you fucking kidding? That's my religion." And he's like, "Oh, well, the guy who plays Bubbles, Mike Smith, he used to be my boom operator." And I was like, "What the fuck?" And he's like, "Yeah, here's his email." And so I emailed Smith 6-7 years ago and just wrote him this love letter, and then they flew me out to do this crazy show called Drunken on Drugs Happy Fun Time Hour. Then we had them in the movie. And then they brought me out to direct the finale of season 8, I think it was. And no, it's the greatest. It's like this rare thing where I was like just a massive fan of these guys, who then I not only got to work with, but like usually if I'm in Halifax, I'm staying at Mike Smith's house, which is fucking the coolest thing in the world. And so like I saw him 2 weeks ago when I was out there, and so yeah, it's the greatest. It's really, really the greatest. I don't sleep very much when I'm around them, but aside from that.
Time for a few more questions, so if you have one, please throw your hand up. Right in the center, near the back there.
Hi.
Hi there.
So this was a very violent movie, and a movie that kind of glorifies fighting. Not that, I don't like fighting, like, woo, go fighting. But do you feel like you could have written it, toned down the violence a little bit, and it would still be as good? And did you really think about maybe what the backlash of kind of glorifying fighting would be?
Yeah, although I hesitate to use the word glorify, I think we romanticize it. There's a big difference between glorifying and romanticizing. Yeah, I could have written it less violent, and we could have made it less violent. I could have written it a bunch of ways, but this is not the poet chooses the words he chose, right? And so this was the palette we wanted to paint with. This is the we made the movie that we wanted to see, and so we also obviously especially in this day and age, even 5 years after this, it's even worse. People will take issue with anything. People will find a problem with anything, and if you go about trying to make a movie for everyone, you'll end up making a movie for nobody. And so I think that you be truthful and responsible and respectful, and but that's about it, And and I'm getting ready for the months of shit I'm gonna get for the new one, because it's not any less bloody. But that's just sort of I don't know. That it's what appealed to us for a bunch of different reasons. So yes, so we could take the blood out of it. We could take Doug's Jewishness out of it too. We could take Eva's drunkenness out of it. There's a bunch of different things, but it wouldn't be that story, right? And I think they're all interwoven, interconnected. It's like Jenga. You can't take the blood out of it without taking everything else out of it too.
Another question. You mentioned the upcoming film. Can you give us any hints or anything about the storyline or where we go from what we just saw?
Yeah, it's so the movie you just watched is a sort of very sweetness and light. Boy loves hockey. Boy meets hockey. Boy meets girl. Right. It's very much a love story. The start of a love story. This next one is boy married to girl, boy married to hockey. And anybody that's ever started dating someone and then kept dating them knows that shit gets a bit more complicated. And the answers are a bit less obvious and shit becomes kind of a bit more gray. And so we asked ourselves what we thought was kind of an interesting question, which is if Doug finds what he's meant to do, right? If this movie you just watched is about a guy finding what it is he's meant to do, what if what you're meant to do is fucking really eating you, And what do you do then? What do you do then if the thing you're meant to do is beating the piss out of you? And I think that's a kind of an interesting, place to put it. And we see a bit more of Doug's a bit more fallible in this one, right? Because Doug at the end of this flick here, Goon, is more or less the same dude as he was at the beginning of it. He goes about affecting change, but he doesn't really undergo the Campbell hero's journey himself. We weren't satisfied to do that again, right? So in the same way that we had an antagonist that you kind of respected, we couldn't rehash that either. So in this one, we think you'll really fucking hate the guy that he has to beat the piss out of, and you'll see Doug actually change a bit.
Cool. Yeah, we look forward to it.
Thank you.
I do see there's a microphone, so let's go here, and then if there's one final question over this side, but down here.
Yes. So, in your 20-year career, what was the one hero moment for you? To clarify, what was the one moment where you had met someone who you held in high esteem, you idolized, and you got to, finally meet them for the first time, and how much it affected you?
Yeah, massively. The sort of three biggies for me, where I saw Brian De Palma at the fucking airport once, and he had the misfortune of being on the same flight as me, and he is one of my. I am the great De Palma apologist. I spent the bulk of my 20s arguing with film students about why his movies are good, and so I had this uninterrupted 5 hours where he's as close to me as he is, and I was like, what am I, an asshole? I gotta fucking do. I was and I'm I know. He's you're not gonna bother this man. Let him. No, fuck it. And so I just I bothered the man. And to his credit, he was just so kind and humble and humored me and literally just was involved. So what's your favorite of your movies, and which ones do the fans like the most, and how did you do that shot, and what was this person like? And then my fucking 225-page horror behemoth, I pitched it to him. And he actually listened to the whole thing and was like, all right, that's interesting, and gave me notes on the pitch and shit. So that was a huge one. Working for David Cronenberg was an absolute another huge one. And then getting to meet, hang out, and work alongside Gary Oldman. That was pretty massive. Yeah. Getting to have him tell me that my Cockney accent wasn't bad was like, I could have retired after that.
So there's some heavyweights there for sure. Yeah. Final question here.
Hey man. First of all, I've got to say thanks for putting the bagpipes in it. As a
got
Scotsman, I really appreciate that. So that was awesome. Is there any upcoming projects you can tell us about? Anything you're doing in the next few years that you can tell us about?
So just kind of finishing up the new Goon flick. Trying to make that as awesome as it can be. Gonna start working on a new How to Train Your Dragon movie, and just got back from your country shooting a documentary called Celtic Soul, all about the shared sports history between Ireland, Scotland, and Canada. And so that's this weird road trip with me and my friend from Ireland, Owen, traipsing about the two countries, making asses of ourselves. So that should be a good one. And then there's like a bunch of sort of scripts that we're trying to do something with. This horror movie we wrote called Random Acts of Violence, which we were like full bore into getting going, and then Goon 2 miraculously happened, so we had to put it a bit on the back burner. But there's a version of things where we might get to shoot that this time next year. So and painting my house. Which is really why you came here today, right? To hear like, I'm painting my house, everybody. You can all sleep well tonight. Yeah, always.
We'll look forward to all of those upcoming projects. I just close by saying you mentioned heroes as our sports figures on tall skates, and I'd also argue that the big screen, our actors.
That's it.
Are up there too, and I think we'd all agree that we count you in with those.
That's nice
so,
of you to say. Thanks.
Thanks for coming out today.
Thanks for having me, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for watching the movie and listening. Thank you.